The day I received the admission letter from Tsinghua University, my cousin knelt in front of me, holding her belly, and said that she was pregnant with my boyfriend's child, and begged me to help them. My mouth was crooked with laughter. I was worrying about how to break up the engagement with the scumbag. Wouldn't it be nice to graduate from a prestigious university and inherit the family property to become a billionaire? Men only affect the speed at which I make money. After sudden death from overwork, I was reborn. As soon as I opened my eyes, I met a pair of pitiful eyes. My cousin Rose, wearing a plain white dress and carrying a large suitcase, stood at the door of my house. "Rose, why didn't you tell your uncle in advance when you came? Uncle will pick you up." My father pushed me aside, pulled Rose into the house, and then moved into my room. Rubbing my arm that was hurt by my father, I squinted. What did I do in my previous life? The unforgettable memory is easy to remember. I was arrogant and didn't want to give up the room. I had a big fight with my father and was slapped by my father. For this, my mom and dad had a big fight, and their already problematic relationship was on thin ice. Not only that, Rose never asked me for advice on studying, and she also flirted with my boyfriend Hannah. I was unwilling to let Rose take everything away from me, so I had no interest in studying. I was thinking about how to make Rose leave my home and my boyfriend. Therefore, I, who had excellent grades since childhood, performed poorly, and my college entrance examination score could only get me into a junior college. Then, my parents divorced, and I followed my dad. Rose framed me and pushed her down the stairs, and my dad kicked me out of the house. Rose took the millions of dowry my dad gave her to marry Hannah, who also came from a wealthy family. After graduating from college, I couldn't find a suitable job, so I entered the factory assembly line and died suddenly from overwork. After I was reborn, I took the initiative to give up my bedroom and moved into the attic on the 3rd floor. It was not because I was afraid, but because I wanted to seize the opportunity of the college entrance examination. I was the only one living on the 3rd floor, and it was very quiet. I studied until late at night every day. I pretended not to know about all the little actions of Rose and Hannah. Finally, the college entrance examination was over, and I was snatched by Tsinghua and Peking University with high scores. In the end, I chose Tsinghua. It wasn't until I got the admission letter from Tsinghua that my heart finally settled. I pushed open the attic window and exhaled a breath of foul air. Now, it's time to start settling the grudges between me, Rose, Hannah and my father. When I went downstairs, I saw Rose nestled in Hannah's arms, smiling shyly. Seeing me, Hannah pushed Rose away and walked towards me. "Hannah, you finally came down. You were busy studying some time ago and didn't care about me. You have to accompany me well from now on." As she said, Hannah was about to reach out and pull me. I took a step back and distanced myself from him. "But I see that there seems to be someone with you." I looked at Rose meaningfully. After a moment of embarrassment, Hannah returned to normal and said in a nonchalant manner, "Hannah, what are you thinking? I am close to Rose only because she is your cousin." Rose's face turned pale due to the harsh words. I curled my lips in pleasure. Hannah and I are a marriage between rich families, and we were engaged when we were young. So in my previous life, I always treated Hannah as my future husband, and I couldn't accept it when Rose took Hannah away. At this time in the previous life, Hannah and Rose were already deeply in love despite my strong resistance. And now, perhaps because of the absence of me as a catalyst, Hannah is still secretly dating Rose behind my back. It is true that my cooperation with Hannah in the performance can make Rose uncomfortable. But it makes me even more disgusted. How can I cancel my engagement with Hannah as soon as possible? After thinking about it, I quickly came up with an idea. I looked at Hannah lovingly. "Anyway, I will marry you sooner or later. Why don't we get married?" "Marry?" Rose exclaimed first. "Why, cousin doesn't want to? Or does cousin want to replace me and marry Ethan?" The words that hit the heart made Rose tremble, not knowing what to say. Hannah's expression was also a little embarrassed. Obviously, he hasn't enjoyed the happiness of having 2 wives at the same time. So, I added fuel to the fire. "Ethan, I was admitted to Tsinghua University. If Auntie knew, she would be very happy." "Did you really get admitted to Tsinghua University?" Hannah's eyes lit up. After seeing me nod, he showed ecstasy on his face. "Wait, I'll go back and tell my mother." The Zhang family made their fortune in the coal mining business a few years ago. Although the coal mining business did not work later, the family was rich and invested in some other businesses. Although their family is rich, no one is a good student. People often stab them in the back in private, saying that they are just a family of nouveau riche and cannot be on the stage. The less they have, the more they like to show off. Wherever Zhang's mother goes, she will show off my good grades. Now that I have been admitted to Tsinghua University, she must hope that I can marry into the Zhang family as soon as possible. As soon as Hannah left my house, Rose couldn't hold back and knelt in front of me, holding her belly. "Hannah, I'm sorry for you. I am pregnant with Hannah's child." I know. After all, the helmets Hannah and Rose used were pierced by me with a needle in advance. My powerful words stopped Rose's crying. "How did you know?" I hooked my lips and said nothing, and went upstairs. It seems that there will be a tough battle in the afternoon. I need to rest for a while and recharge my energy. Bang, bang, bang. I was awakened by the violent knocks on the door. Then, my father's irritable voice rang out from outside the door. You locked the door at home, and you only study and sleep all day long. I'm afraid I have raised a pig. Why don't you learn from your cousin? She gets up early every day to cook, and, why don't you learn from your cousin? She gets up early every day to cook, and, I frowned and walked straight to the door and opened it. Seeing my expressionless face, my father's chattering stopped. Then, his face was filled with anger. You little bitch, you dare to look at me like that. As he said that, he was about to slap me. I hurried downstairs, so that he missed. Downstairs, Zhang's father, Zhang's mother and Hannah were laughing happily. This smile was magnified several times when they saw me. Rose, who was serving tea and water, had tears in her eyes. It seems that Hannah's family doesn't know about Rose's pregnancy. TSK. I thought Rose was so capable. I didn't expect that I would have to expose this matter myself. Uncle, aunt. I walked to Zhang's mother. Zhang's mother saw the Tsinghua admission letter in my hand at a glance, took it and looked at it again and again. Then she handed the admission letter to Zhang's father and took my hand. Our Hannah is excellent, auntie loves you so much. When my dad came down, she couldn't wait to say to him, in-laws, the kids are not young anymore, why don't we hold the wedding first and get the marriage certificate when they are old enough, how about that? The Zhang family is more powerful than my family. After hearing what Zhang's mother said, my dad temporarily put aside his dissatisfaction with me and forced a smile, of course. So, when is the best time for us to set a date? Seeing that Zhang's father, Zhang's mother and my father have already started discussing the date of my marriage with Hannah, I just think it's ridiculous. My mother is still in the company and hasn't come back yet. They are blatantly ignoring my mother. Looking at Rose on the side, her eyes are fixed on Hannah. Hannah, who usually melts at Rose's smile, sits upright at this time and ignores Rose's hint. TSK. Their love doesn't seem to matter in the face of interests. Otherwise, we can schedule the wedding for next month before Hannah starts school. I think it's okay. Zhang's father and mother and my father hit it off immediately, and I spoke at this time. Uncle, aunt, I also want to marry Ethan, but, as I said that, I looked at Rose with an accusing look, and said aggrievedly, but she actually seduced Ethan behind my back and got pregnant with Ethan's child. My words shocked everyone present. Hannah, are you mistaken? She is your cousin. I also think I am mistaken, but this was not long ago, she told me in person. At this time, the eye drops I put in advance can finally be released. Tears, click, fell. I lowered my head and pretended to cry, but I looked at Rose out of the corner of my eye. Among the 3 brothers of the Su family, only my father was admitted to university and married my mother. He used the power of my mother's family to establish the Su group, but the main person in charge of the group is my mother, and my father is just a nominal president. Although my father's elder brother and younger brother's families have a much better life with my father's secret help, they are not comparable to my family. Rose has envied me since she was a child. I have said so much. If Rose does not seize this opportunity to marry into a wealthy family, I will look down on her. Fortunately, this time, she did not let me down. Stared at by everyone, Rose knelt in front of Zhang's father and mother. Uncle and aunt, Ethan and I are really in love. Before Zhang's father and mother could react, Hannah stood up impatiently. I obviously took safety measures, how could I be pregnant? In one sentence, this matter was confirmed. Ethan, I don't know why this happened. Didn't you say that you don't like Hannah at all, that she is dull, and that you will break up with her and be with me sooner or later? You also said, shut up. An anxious Hannah slapped Rose in the face. The next second, Zhang's father kicked Hannah in the stomach. You bastard, you have brought shame to our Zhang family. Why did you hit your son? Zhang's mother refused to accept it. I think it was Rose, the bitch, who seduced my son. If I have to hit her, I'll hit her. Zhang's mother grabbed Rose's hair. My father hurried to stop her. Zhang's mother was so angry that she even scratched my father. Fearing that his face would be scratched, my father took a step back, and then Rose was pressed to the ground and beaten by Zhang's mother. Unable to escape, Rose suddenly covered her stomach and said, my child, my child. A streak of red flowed from Rose's legs to the floor. Fearing that she would be involved in a murder lawsuit, Zhang's mother immediately stopped and called 120. Half an hour later, Rose was carried to the ambulance. Zhang's father and mother, Hannah and my father followed in a panic. I sat on the sofa in the living room, watching the figures walking out the door, with a sneer on the corner of my mouth. Just at this moment, a gloomy gaze swept over. It was my father. He turned his head suddenly and caught the smile on my face. I subconsciously restrained my smile, and soon realized that I was no longer the cowardly and incompetent self who was suppressed by him in my previous life. I raised my head and smiled at my father. The first time he saw my provocative eyes, my father was furious, as if he was going to come back to settle accounts with me. But the ambulance outside couldn't wait, so he could only get on the ambulance and leave. Not long after the ambulance left, my mother came back. She was wearing a slim-fitting business suit and had her hair tied up. Although she was in her 40s and had fine lines around her eyes, she still had a charming demeanor. Her hair was only slightly messy, and it was obvious that she had rushed back in a hurry. "Hannah, Auntie told me that something happened." "What happened?" She was busy with her career and her tone was a little cold, but her eyes were full of concern. Unfortunately, I didn't see this concern in my previous life. At that time, I never thought about whether my mother worked so hard for me. I just thought that my mother was only concerned about working and making money and didn't love me at all. I have been rebellious since I was a child and loved to go against my mother. Even when my mother gave up the Sioux group and divorced my father, and the only condition was to take me away, I was unwilling to lose to Rose, so I resolutely chose to go with my father. In the end, my disappointed mother didn't want anything, left the house and went abroad. Thinking about it, my nose couldn't help but feel sour. "Mom." I threw myself into her arms and hugged her tightly. "Mom, you are finally back." In my previous life, I rarely got close to my mother. Since my rebirth, we have become much closer. But compared with ordinary mothers and daughters, there is still some distance. My mother's body was stiff at first, and then she relaxed and patted my back unskillfully. "Hannah, are you wronged?" "Yeah." I nodded and told her what happened today. "Hannah and Rose are secretly together, and they have a child." "Too much." My mother was furious. "I will go to settle accounts with them now. Today, the Zhang family and the eldest brother's family must give me an explanation." As she said, my mother took me out, driving me to the hospital. When we arrived at the hospital, Rose was lying on the bed dying. Zhang's father and mother, Hannah and my father were all in the ward. The other 3 people looked unhappy, only my father was concerned about Rose. "Rose, does it hurt? Are you hungry? If you feel uncomfortable, tell your uncle." "My child." Rose touched her belly and cried. My father's tone became gentler. "The child is fine, you just need to take care of your body now, don't worry about anything else." "Thank you, uncle." "Heh." My mother, who couldn't stand it anymore, pushed open the door of the ward and said sarcastically, "You were not so considerate when you treated Hannah. People who didn't know would think that Rose was not your niece, but your illegitimate daughter." My mother was my mouthpiece and said everything I wanted to say. As expected, my father was also angry. He has no ability in his career, but he loves to be more irritable than my mother. "Elena, what are you talking about?" I have seen my father like this many times, but this time, I caught a trace of guilt on my father's face that I had never noticed before. I looked at my dad, then looked at Rose on the bed. A bold idea came to my mind. "I'm talking nonsense? Rose even dared to snatch Hannah's fiancé. She's so shameless, and you still protect her. Do you take us mother and daughter seriously? Rose is just young and ignorant, and she is not someone else, she is my niece." Seeing that the two were about to have a big fight, I hurriedly grabbed my mother's hand. "Mom." My mother came back to her senses and took a deep breath, temporarily suppressed her anger towards my father, and turned to look at Zhang's father and mother. Zhang's parents, who were watching the show, suddenly became nervous. "In-laws, that. Don't call me in-laws. Since your son is not self-disciplined, forget about this marriage." Before Zhang's parents could express their opinions, my father rushed out and said, "It's a pity to forget about it. Why not let Rose marry Ethan instead of Hannah?" "That won't do." Zhang's mother's eyes widened. "Hannah was admitted to Tsinghua University, but what about Rose? She didn't even get into college and she came from the countryside. Our Zhang family doesn't like such a daughter-in-law. In my opinion, let Rose abort the baby and go back to the countryside, and pretend that this incident never happened. We can't let a bitch affect the harmony between our 2 families, right? In-laws." Zhang's mother looked at my mother. My mother glanced at my father's livid face. She patted my hand soothingly, then said slowly, "It's not impossible to do this." Seeing my mother give in, Zhang's mother breathed a sigh of relief. "In that case, I will ask the doctor to prepare for the abortion." With that, Zhang's mother planned to arrange it. Rose, who was originally lying on the bed and had difficulty talking, suddenly ran down the bed and hugged Hannah's legs. "Ethan, can you bear to do this to me?" "Whoa." She cried like a pear blossom in the rain. Hannah struggled. Seeing this, Zhang's mother was furious. "Bitch, don't touch my son." As she said that, she tried to pull Rose. But at this moment, 2 figures rushed in. "If you dare to bully my daughter, I will fight you to the death." It was Rose's parents who rushed in. They had obviously just received the news and rushed over. When they saw Rose being bullied, they pushed Zhang's mother away and beat her. Zhang's father also joined the fight. Rose's parents were used to doing farm work and were very strong. Zhang's father and mother were no match for them. Seeing her parents being beaten and screaming, Hannah also rushed in. The 6 people rolled on the ground. "Poochie." I couldn't help laughing. The laughter attracted my father's attention. He strode towards me and said angrily, "Hannah, you're too much. If it weren't for you, how could things have developed to this point?" Me? What does it have to do with me? Isn't it Rose who is shameless? Shut up. I don't. What, is it really like what my mom said? Rose is not your niece, but your illegitimate daughter? My father's face turned blue with anger as I finished speaking. Nonsense. I must teach you a lesson today. As he said that, my father raised his hand to slap me. My mother subconsciously protected me behind her. You dare. Why don't I dare? Elena, if you stop me, do you believe I will beat you too? Heh. The cold boy's voice with sarcasm came from outside the ward at this time. It's really funny, this is the first time I see such a father who can't bear to see his daughter do well. I turned around and saw a strange and familiar face. The boy's facial features are delicate, the contours are clear, and he is extremely handsome. The scratches at the corners of his eyes and the blood at the corners of his mouth not only did not damage his handsomeness, but added a few touches of charm to him. There is obvious hostility in his eyes, and he is full of murderous aura. It is my high school classmate Zane. After graduating from high school, I haven't seen many of my high school classmates. The reason why I felt familiar with him was because I had just met him once before I was reborn. At that time, I was leaving work as planned, but on the road, I was stopped by two men. It was Zane who showed up in a luxury car. He simply honked the horn, and the two men ran away in fear. I thanked Zane, and he said, "You're welcome, old classmate." Only then did I dig out a few fragments of memory about Zane from the depths of my memory. While thanking him, I was also embarrassed. My high school classmate was doing well, but I took back my thoughts and looked at the face in front of me again. He is not as calm as before I was reborn, and looks much more immature, but he is still handsome. Who do you think you are? You, a little brat, are the ones who can interfere in my family affairs. Today I am going to teach my daughter a lesson. Being ridiculed by outsiders, my father, who has a strong sense of self-esteem, felt even more embarrassed. He rolled up his sleeves and was about to beat me. My mother protected me in front of her, and his slap did not stop. He actually wanted to hit my mom too. I tried to stop my dad from hitting me, but a hand got in front of me and held my dad's arm tightly. It was Zane. My furious dad wanted to teach Zane a lesson, but his hand was held by Zane and he couldn't move at all. The two of them confronted each other. Zane looked relaxed, but my dad's face turned the color of pig liver. Finally, the medical staff noticed the movement here and rushed into the ward to separate them. My dad took back his hand and turned to look at Rose. I turned around to thank Zane, but found that he had turned around and left. At the end of the long corridor, his figure was thin. Loneliness lingered. Half an hour later, with the comfort of the hospital staff, everyone present was reluctant to calm down. Except for my father, who seemed to care about Rose but actually stayed out of the matter, everyone else's face was messy and in a mess. The Zhang family raised their chins high and were arrogant. Rose's parents lowered their heads, feeling uneasy. Their biggest dream was to let Rose marry into a wealthy family, and just now, the wealthy family was beaten to the ground by them. The baby in Rose's belly must be aborted. Zhang's father said angrily. Zhang's mother echoed, "Even if I die, I will never let Rose marry." "How can that be?" Sue's father was unhappy. "Your Hannah got our Rose pregnant. If you don't take responsibility, we will go to the door of your company and make a scene, let everyone judge." Sue's words made Zhang's father and mother look ugly. 200,000. That's a life. You want to buy a life for 200,000? You, Father Zhang interrupted Mother Sue's relentless nagging. 500,000. This time, as soon as he finished speaking, Su Daqiang and Lu Meifeng hurriedly nodded. Deal. Rose fainted from crying on the bed. Unfortunately, even if she fainted, she could not avoid the fate of going to the operating table. After dealing with Su Daqiang's family, the exhausted father and Mother Zhang looked at my mother-in-laws. When the baby in Rose's belly is gone, let Ethan and Hannah get married, how about it? My mother's eyes flickered. That depends on how your Ethan behaves. Don't worry, if Ethan messes around in the future, I will break his legs. Mother Zhang pulled Hannah over. Hannah nodded absent-mindedly to promise. My eyes kept glancing in the direction where Rose was pushed away. Without talking to Mother Zhang for much, my mother took me away. In the car, my mother asked me while driving, "What do you think of the marriage with Hannah?" "I don't want that kind of scumbag." When I thought of Hannah, my face was full of disgust. I was disgusted to the point of physical discomfort. He cheated, was cowardly and irresponsible, and there was not a single good thing about him. In my previous life, I was really blinded by my own greed and actually fought with Rose for a piece of shit. My words made my mother's brows a little relieved. "So what do you want to do now?" "I want to break off the engagement with Hannah. It would certainly hurt Hannah and Rose more if I dragged Hannah for a while, but whenever I thought of Hannah's title of fiancé, I felt sick." "Mom, if Rose's baby is aborted, won't the Zhang family continue to rely on me?" I told my mother about my worries. She smiled at me comfortingly. "Don't worry, leave it to Mom." After returning home, my mother called Zhang's mother first. "In-laws, has Rose's baby been aborted?" "Not yet. The doctor said that they have to wait until she wakes up to see her physical condition before operating." I think that bitch Rose is just pretending to faint. Yeah. How can a person who seduces her sister's boyfriend be a good person? In-laws, don't be soft-hearted at the critical moment. Ethan is not infertile. When Ethan and Hannah get married in the future, they will have 10 or 8 children. After ending the call with Zhang's mother, my mother looked at me. Before I asked, she told me, Hannah is the only child. Zhang's father and mother spent a lot of effort to have this child. It is said that Zhang's father has problems. So Zhang's mother may not let Rose go on the operating table considering the issue of passing on the family line? My eyes lit up. My mother smiled and tapped my forehead, smart. In this way, the Zhang family will have no face to bother us, and Rose, even if she can give birth to a child, the Zhang family will not look down on her. Hearing this, I looked at my mother with admiration. Mom, you are so awesome. My mother smiled and hugged me, stroking my head gently. My daughter, no one can bully her. Feeling my mother's warm embrace, my nose couldn't help but feel sour. My mother said this in my previous life. What happened to me? I said, if you really don't want me to be bullied, you should help me get Hannah back. But Hannah is not worth it. No matter whether it is worth it or not, I just like him. I was like a demon, and my only wish was to separate Rose and Hannah. My mother couldn't resist me and went to Zhang's father and mother with a flattering face, but they looked down on her. Yes, Hannah treated me like this, and I was still unwilling to let go. With a daughter like me, won't my mother be looked down upon? Hannah, what's wrong with you? Sensing my emotional fluctuations, my mother asked with concern. I buried myself in my mother's arms and said in a muffled voice, Mom, I think my dad is not worthy of being my dad. Just like she wasn't close to me before, there was always something between my mother and my dad. My mother was busy with work on weekdays, while my dad was squandering my mother's money everywhere. Now that I think about it, there have been problems in their relationship for a long time, but my mother has always insisted on living with my dad because of me. But now, I see clearly that I can do without a father who doesn't care about me. I hope my mother can file for a divorce with my dad. But she didn't. She just hugged me tightly for a long time before she sighed. Although a little disappointed, it is understandable. After all, my mother filed for a divorce with my dad a year later in my previous life, and at that time I had been mentally broken by Hannah, Rose and my dad. She was completely disappointed with my dad and wanted to take me away. Now, my dad didn't seem to have any other unforgivable actions except defending Rose. Although I really wanted to get rid of my dad as soon as possible, I knew that some things could not be rushed. In the afternoon, my mom went out to prepare for my entrance banquet. I called all the servants in the villa and ordered, throw out all of Rose's things. I had tolerated Rose for a while for the sake of studying. From now on, I will not give anyone the chance to hurt me. After all of Rose's things were thrown out, the servants cleaned my room and I moved back from the attic. In the evening, my mom came back first, and my dad came back right after. When he saw us, his expression was no longer arrogant, but a little embarrassed. He walked up to my mom and took her hand. I was also angry in the hospital during the day. Don't be angry with me. Normally, my dad would not apologize even if he knew he had done something wrong. Now he must have some ulterior motive. My mom pulled her hand away and said calmly, look at you, did you abort the baby in Rose's belly? My dad was embarrassed when his inner thoughts were exposed. Hannah had a checkup and found that her sperm was weak. I'm afraid it will be difficult for her to have children in the future. This is also a helpless move. So? My mom looked at my dad steadily. Facing my calm mother, my father's inner guilt turned into anger. Hannah is not doing well and is not liked by Hannah. Since Rose is pregnant with Ethan's child, this marriage might as well be given to Rose. My mother is also stubborn and her face sank on the spot. Sujanan, I don't want this marriage. But what do you mean? What do you mean Hannah is not likable? In your eyes, your niece Rose is the most likable, right? Isn't it? My father slammed the table and stood up. He pointed at me, look at her, she looks like I owe her millions. How can she be likable? She is not like Rose, who will serve me tea and water, ask about my well-being, and, shut up. My mother was so angry that her chest rose and fell. Afraid that my mother would get sick from anger, I hurried forward to calm her down. Mom, let's not be angry. It doesn't matter if Dad doesn't love me. Anyway, I still have you. Seeing my worry, my mother took a deep breath and tried to suppress her anger. Ignoring Sujanan, she took my hand and went upstairs. Upstairs, she looked at me, your father. She wanted to say something, but the words came to her lips and she couldn't say them. I held my mother's hand back. Mom, in my heart, I don't have a father. Growing up, my father never cared about me, never took care of me, never attended my parent-teacher conferences, never. He was not involved in any of the big or small things in my life. In fact, he didn't like me at all, only disliked me. But he was different to Rose. He was like a father in front of Rose. Sometimes I even feel, thinking of the guess in my heart, I gritted my teeth and continued, I think Rose is his daughter, and I am the stumbling block that took away his daughter's position. Hannah. My mother was shocked by my words and exclaimed, "Mom can guarantee that you are your father's child. As for Rose, your father is a selfish man. He has always wanted to suck my blood to support his two brothers. He thinks deep down that he and his two brothers are a family, and that I am an outsider. He puts you in the same position as me, so he treats you. Rose is definitely not your father's child, don't worry. If your father doesn't love you, your mother will love you twice as much." Hearing this, I nodded, and didn't continue to dwell on this issue. Instead, I said, "My father means to let Rose marry Hannah." Zhang's father and mother accepted Rose because she was pregnant? If so, it would be too easy for Rose. Of course not. I know Zhang's father and mother too well. They probably want Rose to give birth to the child secretly, and then let you and Hannah raise it. They asked your father to come back as a lobbyist. But there's no way your father would bear to let his precious niece suffer such an injustice, so he came back this time just to ask me to come forward and persuade Zhang's father and mother to let Rose marry into the Zhang family. I'm not that stupid. After the argument I had with your dad just now, I'm afraid he won't be able to bring himself to say that. After hearing what my mother said, I couldn't help but give her a thumbs up. My mother is awesome. Of course. My mother said proudly, "Your graduation banquet will be held in 3 days. I will send you the address of the hotel on WeChat later. You can invite your classmates to attend your graduation banquet in the next few days. Leave the rest to your mother. On the day of the graduation party, I will announce to the public that you and Hannah have cancelled your engagement." Okay, Mom. I returned to my room, still a little confused. My mom is more capable than I thought. She is so smart that she can be sure that Rose is not my father's daughter. Could it be that I really guessed wrong about this? I shook my head and put this question aside for the time being. I took out my mobile phone and sent invitations to the graduation party to several friends who I have a good relationship with. At the end of the invitation, I thought of Zane. He and I were classmates. But I had very few impressions of him in high school. In my memory, he always sat in the last row of the classroom. During class, he either slept or played with his mobile phone, and the teacher didn't bother to take care of him. He often fought with others, and the teacher would ask his parents to come back for him at any time. He was a typical rebellious student, but because he was handsome, his drawer was always full of love letters. It was just that he never touched those love letters and threw them into the trash regularly. I had very few interactions with him, but he helped me twice in my past and present lives. After struggling for a moment, I still sent a message to Zane. Since I was not familiar with him, my tone was relatively polite. "My graduation party will be held in 3 days. Are you free?" Unexpectedly, the other party responded quickly, with just one simple word, "Okay." Several of my close friends, regardless of whether they did well in the exam or not, all had their entrance banquets during these days. That day, I packed up and prepared to go out. My dad, who was sitting on the sofa, looked me up and down, and his eyes were sharper. "Hannah, is there something wrong?" I said coldly. Frowning unhappily, my dad said, "Your cousin is still lying in the hospital to recover. How can you still have the heart to go out and play? According to what you said, your cousin is still lying in bed. How can you have the heart to drink tea at home? I think you should stay by her side in the hospital." My blunt retort made my father look ugly. "I stayed up late last night, can't I stay up today?" Oh. I was in a hurry to go out and didn't bother to waste words with him. When I walked to the door, my father's voice came again, "Remember to take time to visit your cousin." I'm afraid that asking me to visit Rose was fake, and it was really to take the opportunity to let Rose do some ideological work on me. I left without hearing his words. After attending my friend's graduation banquet, on the way back, I asked the driver to take a detour to the hospital. When I arrived at the hospital, Rose was sitting on the bed eating the fruit that Su Daqiang and Lu Meifeng fed her. Our Rose is really amazing. It seems that she will marry into a rich family sooner or later. What's the use of Hannah's good study? She can't even keep a man. When you marry Hannah, ask your uncle to give you more dowry. The 3 of them were calculating. I pushed the door open at the right time and went in, but Aunt Zhang just called me and told me that Ethan will never marry Rose. After Rose gives birth to the child, she will let her go back to the countryside. My words made the faces of several people in the room change drastically. "Hannah, things have come to this point. Even if you marry Hannah, you can only get his body, not his heart." At this moment, the smugness on Lu Meifeng's face completely disappeared, replaced by a face full of pain. "Hannah, you have been lucky since childhood, you have everything you need, but Rose is different. Can you please stop competing with her for Ethan?" While Lu Meifeng was speaking, Rose was already in tears. "Hannah, for the sake of me being your sister, can you please let me go?" Su Daqiang's attitude remained firm. "Hannah, even if you don't agree to cancel the engagement with Ethan, your father will find a way to make Rose marry Ethan. If you don't let go now, you will be the only one who will be embarrassed." The 3 of them sang the same tune, using both soft and hard tactics. If I were the kind and weak me in my previous life, I would have thought it was my own fault. "What do you mean I'll let you go? It was Rose who shamelessly seduced my fiancé and got pregnant with his child. I'm so unlucky to have anything to do with people like you. I tell you, Rose, no matter what you do, I will not back out of my marriage with Hannah. Just give birth to the child, and your child will call me Mom, and you will never see the light of day. At most the child will call you Aunt. Hearing this, the people in the room were so angry that they were speechless. The meal delivery auntie who had just walked in accidentally broke the bowl at this time. Sorry, I'm clumsy. She hurriedly picked up the broken ceramics on the ground and accidentally scratched her hand. I couldn't bear it and stepped forward. Let me do it. I squatted down and helped her pick up the broken bowl. After picking it up, I stood up and prepared to throw it into the trash can. When I raised my eyes accidentally fell on the face of the meal delivery auntie, and I couldn't leave it anymore. Very similar to Rose. The guess that I had suppressed originally surfaced again. Noticing that I was staring at her face, the lady delivering the meal lowered her head and said to me, "Thank you. It's okay." I patted her shoulder soothingly and took a hair off her head. As soon as I walked out of the ward door, I saw Hannah. He looked very excited. "Hannah, that's great. You don't mind Rose giving birth to my child, and you are willing to be the child's biological mother. Don't worry, I will treat you well in the future." As he said that, he looked at me with deep affection in his eyes. It seems that what I said in the ward just now was heard by him. I almost wanted to vomit. How blind I was in my previous life. I was unwilling to let Rose take away such a thing. What about Rose? I deliberately raised my voice. After she gives birth to the baby, just give her some money. Hannah said it nonchalantly. Inside the house, as Hannah said this, there was another exclamation. Rose fainted again. As for whether it was real or fake, I don't care. I looked at Hannah expressionlessly. What I said just now was just to deliberately anger Rose. From the moment you hooked up with Rose, we have no relationship. Please tell your parents about this when you get home, or they'll tell everyone that I'm your future daughter-in-law. It's embarrassing to be associated with people like you. After saying this, I left without paying attention to Hannah's reaction. The day before the graduation party, my mother and I came back from choosing dresses. I found Rose and his parents appeared at my house. The family of 3 was lying on the sofa, eating melon seeds and watching TV. The villa was full of melon seed shells and spilled tea, messy. What are you doing here? I looked at them. Su Daqiang leaned back on the sofa again. What are you talking about, Hannah? We are a family. Rose has just been discharged from the hospital. It's inconvenient to delay. Where else can we live if not here? The servants came down from upstairs at this time. I looked closely and found that it was something in my room. Noticing my gaze, Rose said innocently, "Hannah, Uncle said I need a good environment to keep healthy, so please live in the attic or the guest room." Good guy. He occupied my room without notifying me again. I was furious. Just as I was about to speak, my mother spoke before me. "Security, throw this family of 3 out." "How dare you? Do you know who I am? I am the eldest brother of the male owner of your villa. If you dare to do anything, I will fire you all." Su Daqiang was furious. However, the security guard ignored them. After all, this villa was a dowry given to my mother by my grandparents. The 3 people who were thrown out sat at the door of my villa and cursed. I said slowly, "If you yell again, I will call the police." As I said that, I took out my mobile phone. I pressed 110 and the 3 people were silent immediately. They got up from the ground and left with their few gifts. Rose. I called Rose at this time. "What else do you want to do?" Rose couldn't pretend anymore. She covered her belly and looked at me with wariness and hatred. "Don't even think about touching my child." "Heh." I sneered. "You can't marry into the Zhang family just by relying on the child. The Zhang family values face the most. Only if everyone knows that you are pregnant with Hannah's child, the Zhang family will let you enter openly. How can you be so kind?" Rose's expression was very touching. She was not completely brainless. Soon, she figured it out. "Hannah, you did it on purpose. You want the Zhang family to be ruined." "Yes, I did it on purpose. I'll give you the opportunity. Do you want it or not?" Not long after Su Daqiang's family left, my father came back. In the living room, he and my mother had an unprecedented quarrel. Because of me, because of Rose. The quarrel between the 2 started from Rose seducing Hannah and extended far. My father felt that for so many years, my mother thought she could make money and always suppressed him, which made him feel very embarrassed. And my mother, in addition to feeling that I was wronged, the biggest knot in her heart was my father's years of cold violence. My mother, who was always elegant and self-sustaining, couldn't help but break down emotionally at this time. "Su Zhennan, you are a coward, useless, and male chauvinist. You don't protect your wife and children, you are a wolf-hearted and blind man. Elena, you are looking for death." My father raised his palm and was about to hit my mother. Of course, his slap didn't fall on my mother. In midair, he was stopped by the security guard. "Beat Su Zhennan to death. The harder you beat, the more bonus you will get." Then, the living room was filled with Su Zhennan's screams. I have wanted to do this for a long time. In my previous life, even if I only went to junior college, I could still live a good life through hard work. It was Sujanan, Rose and Hannah. No matter what job I found, they would use their power to ruin my job. My miserable life in my previous life, even though I was blinded by my own greed, I never did anything bad from beginning to end. It was these bad guys who kept forcing me. The moment I was reborn, I wanted to beat Sujanan to death. But when I really did it, I didn't feel very happy, because of my mother. My mother's face was full of injuries. Mom. I stepped forward and held my mother's hand, calling carefully, Mom, I'm fine. My mother forced a smile at me. When Sujanan was beaten so hard that he couldn't make a sound, my mother said to the security guard, Stop it. I was still a little unwilling to let Sujanan go. My mother patted my hand soothingly, Tomorrow is your graduation banquet. It's not good if things get out of hand. So, I didn't say anything else. Sujanan was sent to the hospital. My mother specially found someone to watch over the door of the ward. At night, the light in my mother's room was always on. I walked to the door of my mother's room with a worry in my heart. I saw that she had taken out the photos with my father one by one in the room. She first looked at them and recalled the past, and then tore them up fiercely. Yes, I only saw the bad things about my father, but I didn't see everything that my father and my mother had experienced in the past. Noticing my arrival, my mother waved at me. I walked over and snuggled in my mother's arms. My mother's voice came from above my head. When I wanted to marry your father, your grandparents disagreed, saying that your father had a bad family background and was not strong in personal ability. I was deceived by your father's sweet words and was determined to marry him. Now it seems that I really made the wrong choice. Mom, everyone will make the wrong choice in their life. As long as you find your mistakes in time, it's fine. Besides, I raised my head and looked at my mother. Besides, if you hadn't been with my father, maybe you wouldn't have such a smart daughter like me. My joking words successfully made my mother smile. She looked at me and asked seriously, Hannah, if I divorce your father, can you accept it? Yes. Then will you choose to be with me? Yes. This time, I answered without hesitation. Maybe my answer gave my mother strength, and my mother's face was stained with confidence again. After your entrance banquet is over tomorrow, I will file for divorce from him. Okay. I hugged my mother and slept with her. I waited until her breathing was stable before I got up. I found a short hair of my father on the pillow and went out of the bedroom with it. Early the next morning, I made an excuse to go out and went to the hospital to get Rose's hair. Then I submitted the hair of Rose and my father, as well as the hair of Rose and the aunt who delivered the meal, for paternity testing. After returning home, my mother and I set off for the hotel. Near noon, the guests arrived one after another. My father was recuperating in the hospital, but he still got up and came to attend my graduation banquet. I was a little worried that he would make a fuss at the graduation banquet, but my mother said that my father was the most vain person, so I was relieved. As my mother thought, my father, who usually didn't even bother to give me a glance, was now full of smiles, and his smile was so big that the bandages wrapped around his face couldn't stop it. Lao Su. Your daughter is really promising. Of course, I will do it. Someone looked at his miserable appearance and asked with concern, What happened to you? How did you get hurt like this? There was a little more haze in his deep eyes, but my father's smile was still bright. Oh. Isn't it because my daughter was happy that she was admitted to Tsinghua University? She drank one more cup and fell like this. Hearing this, my mother and I looked at each other and couldn't help laughing. I have to say that he is quite good at finding excuses for himself. This ability to lie with open eyes is really useful. The guests came in wave after wave, and finally, my grandparents came while my mother was looking forward to it. At the beginning, my grandparents were angry because my mother was stubborn to marry my father. Over the years, although they secretly helped my mother in her career, there was almost no contact in public. Over the years, although they secretly helped my mother in her career, the two old people were only happy when they were facing me. But in fact, I knew that they were just using my name to care about my mother, and they loved me as much as I loved my family. Dad, Mom, you are finally here. My mother breathed a sigh of relief. My grandparents looked proud. If we were not afraid that Hannah would regret the graduation party, we would not come. Yes, I will take you in. My mother went to help my grandparents. My classmates also came, the Zhang family also came, and the Rose family also came. It was almost noon, and the guests were almost all here, but I still didn't see Zane. It was not until this time that I felt that I was a little rash. I didn't know how Zane's academic performance was, and I didn't know which university he was admitted to, so I rashly invited him to come. Just as I was thinking, a familiar voice suddenly came from above my head, Excuse me, where should I sit? I looked up and met Zane's beautiful eyes. I'll take you there. As I said that, a smile bloomed on my face involuntarily. I took Zane to the table where my high school classmates were sitting. Seeing Zane, the girls who were chatting suddenly blushed and fell silent. Hannah, you are really amazing. You invited the school hunk who never gets close to anyone. Hearing this, I just smiled and said nothing. The Su group is not small. Most of the people who came to my graduation party were business partners. I followed my parents to toast everyone. When it was the turn of the Zhang family, someone expressed doubts. Why are you in-laws sitting with us? My mother smiled and said, it's like this, Hannah and Ethan's engagement has been cancelled. The engagement between the two was just a joke many years ago. Don't take it seriously. The people present were all smart, and no one continued to ask. Instead, Zhang's father and mother were unhappy. But they endured it and didn't express their opinions. My mother wanted to save some dignity for the Zhang family, but I didn't want to. Doing something undignified and wanting to end it decently, how can there be such a good thing in the world? I looked at Rose. She was holding her belly, struggling, as if she was struggling whether to expose the fact that she was pregnant with Hannah's child on the spot. So, I walked towards Hannah, who was not far from her. Halfway through the road, suddenly, my foot twisted and my body fell straight forward, and right in front of me was Rose. Just as I was about to hit Rose, I suddenly felt a force on my waist. It was Zane. He hooked my waist. Thank you. I stood up in Zane's arms and thanked him. Rose, who was still in shock, exploded. She stood up from the chair holding her belly, pointed at me and accused, Hannah, you did it on purpose, you just can't stand seeing me pregnant with Ethan's child, you want to take the opportunity to get rid of my child. As soon as Rose's words came out, the whole audience was in an uproar. Everyone instantly understood that the reason why Hannah and I broke off the engagement was because Hannah hooked up with my cousin and even had a child. Everyone present wanted to save face, and many looked at the Zhang family with contempt. Zhang's father and mother wanted to save face the most, and Zhang's mother immediately denied. Rose, what are you talking about? Our Ethan is not someone you can hook up with just because you want to. At this point, Rose broke the jar and said, Auntie, you know whether the child in my belly is Ethan's or not. If you really don't recognize it, you can do a paternity test after the child is born. You bitch, I'll tear your mouth apart. Seeing that the Zhang family and Su Daqiang's family were about to fight again, my mother directly asked the security guards to drive the two families out. The scene became quiet again. Everyone looked at me with more sympathy. Of course, except for my father among these people. His face was livid, and his eyes looked like he wanted to eat me. After the graduation party, as soon as I got home, my dad exploded, how can you two be so vicious? Rose is pregnant with Hannah's child and is not recognized by the Zhang family. She is already very pitiful. Do you have to force her to death? But, isn't this what she deserves? Hannah, don't think I dare not teach you a lesson. My dad strode towards me. The security guards stood in front of me and surrounded me tightly. If you don't want to be beaten and hospitalized again, just do it. I knew you were not a good person, you. Enough. My mother couldn't stand it anymore and interrupted my father, Su Zhenan, let's get a divorce. Divorce? Elena, are you kidding? My father's tone was full of shock and disdain. Obviously, in his cognition, no matter how he treated my mother and me, my mother would not divorce him. Yes, divorce. My mother said loudly. My father, who took a while to accept this fact, sneered, divorce, divorce, and split the property in half. Why should I split it in half with you? What have you contributed to this family besides eating, drinking and having fun? I was dissatisfied. My mother said, okay, I'll ask a lawyer to draft an agreement later. That's it. After my father went upstairs, my mother looked at me and comforted me. Hannah, since you have decided to divorce, it is most important to cut the Gordian knot. Money can be earned again by your mother. Besides, he is your father after all, so it's okay to give him some money. What my mother said made sense, and I didn't say anything for the time being. Seeing that my mother was fine, I told her that I was going out to find my classmates. In fact, I went to the hospital. It would be best if my guess was wrong. In that case, in order to prevent my mother from being too sad, I can let Su Zhenan get some property. When I arrived at the hospital, I successfully got the test results. When I opened the test report and saw the results on it, I was so angry that I almost couldn't breathe. I guessed right. Rose is really the child of Su Zhenan and the aunt who delivered the meal. I immediately took the test results back to show my mother. My mother, who was originally still sad about the marriage of several decades, was completely enveloped in anger when she found out that my father had an extramarital affair and the child he had was older than me. As expected of my mother, even if she was angry, she did not let her anger consume her rationality. She called my grandparents and told them about it. My grandparents came with my 3 uncles. My dad, who was taking a nap, was dragged off the bed and beaten by my 3 uncles. He was already injured and was beaten to death. Then my eldest uncle put a divorce agreement in front of him and asked him to sign it. My dad refused to sign it when he saw that it said he was to leave the house. My eldest uncle snorted coldly, Su Zhenan, you better think about it. If you don't sign, I will sue you for bigamy tomorrow and put you in jail. Not only that, I will beat the rest of your Su family every time I see them in the future, and you will never get ahead in this life. My dad, who only then knew that Rose's affairs had been exposed, signed his name with a gloomy face. At this moment, my parents divorced completely. From now on, he is no longer my dad. Sujanan was thrown out of the villa like a piece of trash. I'm so angry. If it weren't for Hannah, I would have put him in jail. Several uncles were so angry. My mother didn't care about being sad, and turned to comfort my grandparents and uncles. In the end, my grandparents and uncles felt sorry for my mother and me, and insisted on taking us to live there for a while. At my grandpa's house, I felt unprecedented warmth. It was so warm that I never wanted to go back. My mother also felt that the villa was unlucky, so she sold it below the market price. There was still more than a month before Tsinghua University started, and my mother asked me, "What are your plans next?" "Mom, I want to go to the company for an internship. After getting rid of the scum, making money is the kingly way. I have to learn how to manage a company as soon as possible so that I can inherit the family business." After hearing my answer, my mother smiled and said, "It's just right, I have the same plan." My mother took me to buy a few professional suits. Put on the professional suits and tie up my long hair. I was confident in the mirror, no longer cowardly in my previous life. The next day, I went to the company with my mother. I witnessed my mother giving instructions to the Human Resources Department to fire all the people who Sujanan had stuffed into the company before. Soon, my mother's phone started to ring nonstop in the president's office. "Sister-in-law. We are relatives after all. Sujanan's bad deeds have nothing to do with me. Sister-in-law, I have broken up with Sujanan. It's hard to find a job now. Can you not fire me for our previous friendship?" In the face of interests, Sujanan's proud brotherhood was vulnerable. My mother, who was too lazy to waste time, directly blocked all these people. My mother threw me to a senior in the company, and I had a lot to learn every day. In this busyness, the Zhang family and Su Daqiang's family's affairs also fell into my ears. It's not that I want to hear it, but there are too many scandals in the Zhang family recently, and everyone in the circle knows about it. After Rose announced in public at my graduation banquet that she was pregnant with Hannah's child, Zhang's father and mother, who felt that their face was lost by Rose, ordered Hannah not to associate with Rose anymore. I don't know whether it was Hannah's affection or Rose's skill, but Hannah continued to hang out with Rose behind Zhang's father and mother's back. When Zhang's mother accidentally found out, she was so angry that she was hospitalized. Zhang's group, due to their ugly behavior, several major cooperation projects failed and suffered heavy losses. Seeing the company's stock price falling day by day, Zhang's father was overwhelmed. That's not all. It turned out that Rose didn't know that she was an illegitimate daughter who couldn't see the light. After learning that the aunt who delivered the meal was her mother, she scolded Sujanan and her biological mother for being shameless. In a fit of anger, she directly lost the child in her belly. Rose, who lost her child, no longer had the opportunity to marry into the Zhang family. Her status in the Su family plummeted. She was no longer arrogant and began to coax Sujanan again. After all, Sujanan had money in his hands. The reason why Sujanan signed the divorce with my mother was that he was afraid of going to jail and my uncles, and secondly, he had a lot of private money. But how could he, who was used to a life of luxury, bear the days of his savings gradually decreasing? Under the deception of Su Lao San, Sujanan became addicted to gambling. In just 1 month, he lost millions of dollars. Without money, Sujanan could no longer get the flattery of the Su family and was driven out of the house by the Su family. I heard from the neighbors of the villa that the miserable Sujanan went to the villa to look for me and my mother, but unfortunately, the villa had changed hands a long time ago and he didn't find anyone. Listening to others talking about the miserable situation of those people again, I found that my heart was not too volatile. They and I have long been people from two different worlds. No matter how well they live in the future, I will work hard to become better and better. On the first day of school at Tsinghua University, Hannah stopped me at the school gate. "Hannah, Rose and I have completely broken up. We grew up together and have been childhood sweethearts. Can you forgive me this time?" The funny thing is that I actually saw some real affection in Hannah's eyes. Some people are like this. They don't cherish what they get easily, and they dream about what they can't get. Sorry, I don't forgive. I feel that it's a waste of life to look at Hannah for one more time. I bypassed Hannah and walked into the campus. A familiar figure came into view. It was Zane. He also had an admission letter in his hand. It seemed that he was waiting for me. Seeing me, he came over and invited me. "Do you want to report together?" I nodded and walked side by side with Zane. "Don't dwell on the past, don't fear the future. I will eventually live the life I want to be."